And today I'm going to go through a couple of thoughts I have about using project templates for Vectorworks and a couple of different ways to approach that. So uh, I don't have a super tightly scripted um, procedure for us today, um, but let's go ahead and start. I'll start by opening a template that I have. And I just keep that template on my Google Drive and I give it a name, um, and it gets refreshed every year or so. And so I keep old ones around. I'm not quite sure why. So I'll just go ahead and open that. When you create a template, what Vectorworks does is it opens a duplicate of the file itself and names it untitled whatever, 1 to 30, depending on where you are. If it's the first time you've launched Vectorworks, it'll call it Untitled 1. And if you've had Vectorworks open for a while and you've already created some untitled documents, it'll uh, call it Untitled N. In this case, it's Untitled 8. And that's why, because I've already created 7 untitled files since I last launched Vectorworks, in case you're curious. So let's look and see what my template contains. I'll start with the organization palette, and we'll just go ahead and start with classes. So Dick was just sharing that he's just reclassed his all of his standard classes. These are more or less ours. Long time ago, it was quite onerous to create new classes, but that hasn't been the case for decades. So it's really pretty easy to delete a class and replace any objects in that deleted class with a new class. So there's a little bit more flexibility. I used to be extremely rigid about class names, and now I've gone from extremely rigid to merely very rigid. But anyway, so I've got all these classes in my template, and you can see that in the use column, all of these, or the use column, all of these almost are checked, which is to say that you need to use these attributes by class. Now, here's one where that's not checked. Let's look at that. So somehow use it creation got deselected. I just now noticed that. So I want to make sure and change that. But of course, that's not going to do anything for my template. Like the next time I open a file from this template, I'm going to have the same problem. So it's probably a good idea to periodically go through and police your template. Kind of go through your classes, make sure that those are still what you want, that they have appropriate graphic attributes and so forth. And then once you've cleaned up your template, maybe you spend half an hour or so doing that, go ahead and save that file back down as a template. So now that I've cleaned this, kind of fortuitous that there was this little problem here. Now that I've cleaned that up, and let's see, I don't really want site improvements here. That kind of crept in here. So when I get this prompt that I want to remove this class and it doesn't offer to replace objects with another class, that means that there is nothing in this file that is drawn in this class. So I will go ahead and remove it. And for the sake of argument, we'll say that that is all that's wrong with this file. I'm 100% certain that that is not the case. So what I'll do is, in order to refresh my template, I'll simply go to File and Save as Template. And then I'll just go back to my library. Here it is, FLAI residential. So if I just click on that, it'll rename it automatically, even though it's grayed out. And I'll hit save. It'll ask me if I want to replace it. I'll hit replace. And then watch as this becomes untitled 9. And that's because when I saved it as a template, it immediately reopened the template and reopened it as an untitled file. So there it is. Okay, so back to organization. So in my template, I've got all of my standard classes and I've got their attributes set the way that I like. The other thing that I have in my template are design layers, and I'm actually going to postpone talking about the design layers really quickly. I want to talk about stories first. So as of now, there's really no way, and I think I've talked about this before in our meetings when we talked explicitly about stories. There isn't a way that I'm aware of, and if someone can correct me if I'm wrong, please do, to export a story schema or import a story schema from one Vectorworks file to another. So if you want to not have to build your stories from scratch every time you start a new file, you're going to need to use a template. And so stories are one of the most compelling reasons to use templates, not the only one, but a really important one. And we use stories even on one-story projects because stories have levels that can control the heights of various objects like wall components or symbol insertions. All sorts of things can be story bound. So just setting up a typical story, whatever that looks like for your most common project type. In this case, I've got one for a 2-story residence. A lot of our projects are single-story residences. Having a second story isn't a problem. It's easy enough to delete that second story, or you can just leave it there. Doesn't really hurt anything to have a 1-story building in a 2-story file, so to speak. So I don't really want to get into the weeds about stories, but just know that there's no way that I'm aware of anyway to export or import stories. So just having a template file where your stories are already set up is really, it's going to save you half an hour at least every time you start a new file. And so because so many of our story levels have layers assigned to them. So I've got a bottom of structure with a roof layer here, a finished floor with a floor layer. I've created a custom story type called existing for my existing construction in the case of a remodel or an addition, right? And so because so many of those layers are linked to story levels, I just wanted to talk about stories first and then point out that in the template, there are also standard design layers. And as you can see, there aren't that many of them, only 7. And of those, 5 of those are linked to stories. So, so I create my story first, decide which design layers are going to be associated with those stories, and then let the stories generate the design layers, which I can then, fiddle with as I need to tweak the default wall height, whatever. Likewise, I might have sort of a standard set of sheet layers that are common to many of our projects. And just having a few sheet layers is a big savings in time. And those are easy enough to sort of duplicate just by highlighting them and duplicating them. So I wouldn't necessarily feel that it's a great idea to have a template that has every imaginable sheet layer that you would want in your file, just because, at least in our case, every project is different enough that I would be if I had, an exhaustive set of sheet layers, I would be spending a lot of time deleting sheet layers as opposed to simply adding them as I needed them. So unlike um, say classes where it's kind of a hassle to create a bunch of new classes, simply because then they need to get assigned to things, creating sheet layers is really quite easy. Viewports, you'll notice that my template doesn't have any viewports set up. You can certainly create a template that already has your viewports in place. So, ground floor plan, a roof plan, and so forth, that's already on the appropriate sheet layer with a link to the design layers that you want to populate that viewport and class visibilities. The reason that I don't have those already preset is let's look at our resource manager here, and let's look at viewport styles, of which I have none. So this is a clear case where don't do what I do, just do what I say. It would be a really great idea for me to import some viewport styles from other projects and include those in my template. So, while we're here, let's go ahead and do that. So I'll go ahead and browse a document. And this one just happened to open up. And there are no viewport styles in that document. So let's go ahead and browse one that I'm pretty confident is going to have some viewport styles. So here I'll go to a project. Yeah, where is it? There we go. So let's go to DD file here. All right, well, this one has one viewport style, so I'll just go ahead and import that into my untitled document, and it'll just go on the top level. It'll tell me that there's already some textures or resources that are associated here. In this case, because I'm confident that my template is fairly up to date, I'm just going to go ahead and use the existing texture, and I'll do that for every resource. So now if I look at the resources for Untitled 9, there's that interior elevation viewport style. Let's go ahead and edit that, and you can see that it has a default scale. There are a series of layers and classes that are associated with that style, that viewport. I've got a detail level. Hidden line and is my default setting. Orthogonal, projection, and so on. So all of these settings are sort of preset. So I would advocate that in your template, you would want to have a viewport style for your ground plan view or your floor plan viewports, your reflected ceiling viewports, your building sections, your building elevations, your interior elevations, and so forth, right? That would be a great way to go as opposed to creating all of your viewports, because then you can edit the style and then that'll happen globally. So I see that there's something in the chat. Yeah, so Dick's asking what the advantages of viewport styles are, and really consistency is a big advantage. For my interior elevations, I like the section of that interior elevation to be anything sectioned to be in the 0.3 millimeter pen weight. So that's, for example, something that I can apply to that style. So once I set it up, I don't have to revisit that. And if I change my mind at some point, I can just change it, that sectioning pen weight for that style. And then any viewport to which the style has been applied is going to update accordingly. So clearly, in spite of advocating for viewports, I still have, or templates rather, I've got a little bit more work to do to sort of fill out my template to make sure that the styles that I like and just the way that I like them are built into the template. You may have some tiles that are in your viewport, certainly, or I'm sorry, in your template. Certainly text styles, you're probably going to want those to be consistent across all of your projects. And then in this case, I've got folders for my symbols and plugin objects. And I've got some standard, say, plugin object door and window types that we've done. Or I have some standard graphic symbols, including drawing labels. Right? All of those are kind of built into that template. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these have their names in italics. So there's a couple of schools of thought as to how you would set up your template. One would be that your template would just contain all of your common symbols, right? So, we like to do a fair amount of furnishings. This is actually a really very light set of furniture symbols. In a typical project, we might have, 3 times this many symbols. And so why hunt around to all of your different projects to find, oh, there was that couch that I modeled for this one project and I'd like to use it here, right? Just go ahead and keep it in your template. However, all of those symbols that are embedded in your default template are, they're taking up a fair amount of space, right? And so your files are going to be a bit larger. But also, over time, you're going to have dozens or hundreds of instances of this same symbol that you use again and again and again. And that's not very efficient. So one approach to your template is to actually reference your symbols. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all these just so that I can make the point. Let's see. Oh, I'm in Untitled 9. So let's look at that. That's what's going on here. So let's go to furnishings. All right. So here you can see that these are not italicized, right? So in this case, if I, this Shays is native to this file. If I make a change to that Shays, like I change it from orange to blue or whatever, that change is only going to happen in this single instance. So an alternative approach is to create sort of a resource library. So let's find that. Okay. So here's an example of a resource file. If we look at that file, you can see that it's got a bunch of folders, look a lot like my template. I've got a furnishings folder. There's that Knoll salsa lounge chair, right? And if I go back to my template file here that I was showing you initially and look at the resources there, so we have to keep track of where we are here in the resource manager. We're now looking at template, furnishings, you can see it's got that same symbol right here, but here it's italicized. So I'll go ahead and delete that. Okay. And so the way I would reference another resource is, again, I'm here in my template file, which is sort of a working file that eventually I'm going to save as a new, improved, better template. So I'll go ahead and navigate over to my central resources file, which lives on a server that everybody can access, in this case, a Google Drive. I'll go over to furnishings. I'll go ahead and highlight this symbol. I'll right click on it. And you see that when you right click on the symbol, there's an option to reference it. And I can preserve the folder hierarchy so that if it's in a folder, in this case called furnishings, it'll put it in the folder called furnishings in the file that I'm referencing it into. And if there is no such folder, it'll create one. So I'll go ahead and keep the same hierarchy and hit OK. And now if I go back to this active file here in the resource manager and go to furnishings, there it is, right? So let's go to our resources. And that is now the active file. And let's go to furnishings and let's look at this symbol. And you can see, again, it's not italicized. So I know that this symbol is actually in this file. And let's go ahead and edit. Actually, let me take a step back. Let's go back to my template file. Make that the active file. And I'll go ahead and insert this referenced. Okay, so there it is. So here's a symbol. It's inserted in my template file. It's referenced, and I can, I know that because when I look at it, its name is italicized. And under the object info palette, it tells me that it's a 2D, 3D symbol and it's referenced, right? So again, this symbol is referenced from my file called resources. Let's go to that resource file. Let's edit. Got to make sure I'm looking at the right one. Let's go ahead and edit the 3D components here. So now we're inside the 3D components of the symbol, right? And I'm just going to, that's a group for some reason. And let's just change that to something really obnoxious. So I'll exit the group. Yeah.
If you change that one that you're doing now to blue, does that change it in all of the files that it is referenced in?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So you're making a global change.
That's exactly, yeah, that's exactly what I want to demonstrate here.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. So let's go ahead and save my resources. So I'm saving that change, right? And then there's probably a refresh command here somewhere. That's for project sharing. Okay. So let's go back to my template and under furnishings, I'll go ahead and drop that in. And it's still, it's still showing as the original version, right? But if I go to my references, you can see that my resources I'm under the navigation palette here, and I'm going to my references. You can see that that's out of date. So if I go ahead and update that, they all turn blue. So the advantage of having a resource library that your template, or any file for that matter, references, is that you only have to have a single instance of that object, and it's kind of the definitive definition of that particular symbol, right? Whatever it is. And if you decide that that symbol needs to change, then you can make that change once in the resource manager, and then that change will happen wherever, everything that references to it. So that may be desirable or undesirable depending on the situation. There's not a one size fits all. Typically if it's something that is a graphic standard, like how you want your center line symbol to look, or how you want your title block to look, or whatever, that's probably a good idea to go ahead and reference that in. But then there are going to be some resources where maybe you want to be able to change the chair color on a case-by-case basis, and you don't want to have to change it retroactively. So then here I can also edit this 3D component, and I'm going to get this dialog box that if I make a change here, it's actually going to reach back and make that change over in the original file. Yeah, because I've got that file open. So I'll need to go ahead and close this file. It's updating. Go back to my template. Let's go ahead and edit the 3D component. Yes. Go back to the group. Change that back to whatever orange color that was. It's right there. It's that one there. Okay. Go ahead and exit, save that. Now let's go back to our resources. Yep. Interesting, it's not letting me open that file. Oh, maybe I need to exit the symbol. No. There we go. Yeah, it wouldn't let me open that. And now if I go back to my resource library, go to furnishings, there it is. And so now it's once again back to its old orange, and you can see, of course, it is there too. Oops. Didn't mean to click that. I meant to click the chat. Let's see. Yeah, so you can create symbols and keep them in a favorites file that live here in your work group libraries or your user library. You can have some favorites that you add there. And then if you build that into your template, that also follows your template along. So the nice thing about the library, sort of the resource library model, is if I change it to one place, it changes it everywhere, right? And then the problem with this model is if I change it in one place, it changes everywhere. So there's just certain things you're not necessarily going to want to have referenced. So, for example, let's look at worksheets, right? I've got some standard worksheets that live in the template: a lighting schedule, impervious cover calculation sheet, floor area ratio calculation sheet, the tell me about yourself worksheet that I got from Michael Klar's years ago from a Vectorworks Design Summit, which is the most awesome thing ever. Plumbing schedule, right? So obviously I don't want to reference those in because I don't want every project to have the same plumbing schedule or the same drawing index or the same,
What's that?
whatever. So so that's
One,
something to to keep in mind, that this idea of having everything as a in a centralized library that your template refers to sounds really great, but there are certain things that you are always going to want to be able to change on a case by case basis. Worksheets are, one of the more obvious examples of that. Um, and the good news is worksheets aren't really very huge for the most part, and so um, having a non-referenced worksheet sort of built in natively into your template file is not that's not a huge sort of problem at all. But again, things like text styles here, these I don't have referenced, but um, probably I should. So I'll go ahead and reference those. And now if I go back to my template, here are the text styles and they're referenced. And so, everybody has the same text styles. Um, Renderworks styles, Renderworks textures. I'm on the fence about that. So many of those are associated with classes, um, but probably not a bad idea to have those in a centralized location. Um, Hatches, you don't generally edit hatches very often. Um, Line types, you probably have some standard sort of office line types, so that could be uh, referenced in your template from a resource library. Certainly materials and so forth. So the other thing is that you can see just from my chatting here for the last 30 minutes or so, um, there's always room for improvement in your template. So as I was saying earlier, it's not a bad idea to go through the template and police it and make sure that it's up to date. Maybe you create some great new um, symbol, or you improve a symbol that you use over and over again, and you want to go ahead and update that into your resource file uh, and or your template. You have a change of heart about fonts, and you want to, whatever, go ahead and change that and keep that up to date in your template. And, obviously I need to go back and uh, save a bunch of viewport styles and include those in my template. Um, and so really your template, there really isn't a lot that's drawn in the template. Um, maybe you've got some sheets already set up, with a title block, some project notes, things like that. I think my title block went AWOL here. Um, but there's really not a lot that's already drawn in a template. And a good place to start is, take a project file that is fairly comprehensive and just go through layer by layer and delete things that are drawn in the layer, but of course keep the resources and clean it up, save it as a template. And then the next project that you do, you're basing it on that. And then maybe you'll discover that you forgot an important component. So you can go ahead and add that to your template and then save that file back as a template, and so forth. As far as where your template uh, should reside, let's see, if we go to Vectorworks settings and we go to user folders and reveal in Finder, right? There's a folder there for see, wonder where that went. That's interesting. No. Now I'll have to search for it. Maybe it's not in that library. Maybe it is in your applications folder. I'll have to think about that for a minute. I generally keep mine just in a folder that everybody has access to on our Google Drive. There's a location that slips my mind at the moment that if you just create new, let's look for that. Yeah, it's in the library. Okay, so it's in your applications folder. Under libraries, defaults, templates. So you can keep your template here. It's always going to have a .sta, and or if you want to keep it somewhere else, you're certainly free to do that. But then you have to navigate to it as opposed to it's coming up automatically when you hit new. Questions from anyone? Comments? Corrections? Okay. Well, if something comes to you, you can go ahead and we can circle back to it. In the meantime, I also wanted to talk about title blocks today. So for years and years and years, I had a title block symbol. Let me go ahead and pull that up. Yeah, it looks like this. That I had made myself, and there have been some variations of it. And it's just a 2D symbol. And then if you go into the symbol and you click on a text block, that text block is actually given by a record format. So if we look in this title block file, and let's go to this title block file and look at symbols, or I'm sorry, record formats. You can see that I have a title block record that I created ages ago. If we edit that, there's a dozen or so fields that I created along with these are just text fields with some default values. And so inside the symbol, if you highlight in a 2D symbol text block under modify, you can link text to record and then decide which record format you want to link to and then which field within that record format you want that text to link to. Hit OK. Hit OK. And then in the data tab of your object info palette under project name, because that title block record is attached to this symbol, it'll give you all of the fields within that title block record. You can see that my revision dates are like from January 98. So it gives you an idea of how old this record format is. All right. And so I can give that a project name and it updates the text, right? That's kind of back in the day, that was really the only way that we could do a title block that would um, be graphically consistent from layer to layer, but have editable fields, right? A symbol with editable fields, that's the procedure. Um, there's some nice things about doing it this way. One is you've got a lot of graphic control. You can make your title block look like just about anything, and you can create your own custom fields and have some text editable, other text not editable. Um, you know, it's pretty straightforward. There are some disadvantages to this. One is that almost, not just almost, everything has to be sort of manual. So if I want to change the date issued, I have to either select the title block and manually change the date in the object info data tab, or maybe I can do a find replace text, do that a lot. But it's essentially a manual process to edit any of these fields. None of it's automated. And that is both more time consuming in the end, and it's also um, leaves you subject to errors. So some time ago, Vectorworks had a title block tool, and that lives in the dimensions and annotations, and it looks like this icon here. And I'm going to go ahead and pick a style. And we'll use the existing one. We'll do that. Okay. So I'll go ahead and insert that title block. So that's the title block that Vectorworks has given me, right, by default. And, this is what it looks like. And these are all styled. And so I have a variety of styles that I can choose that Vectorworks will provide right out of the box. I have a Vectorworks architect title blocks, standard title blocks, spotlight title blocks, simple title blocks, ASME title, on and on, right? All sorts of styled title blocks. But essentially, the title block has three major components. There's the border itself, so I can have a title block that's associated with that border or not. There's project data, so that's data that's going to be consistent for every sheet in the same project. And then there's sheet data. So that's information that would change, obviously, from sheet to sheet. So if we look at this styled title block and actually, I think what I'll do is I'll change it to unstyled, and that way we can just kind of mess with it and not worry about breaking anything. So if I go to my title block border settings, let me zoom out just a little bit so that you can see my object info palette and the title block at once. You can see that there are a ton of options with the with the title block in terms of the sheet border, whether you show grid lines, right? So I could do 5 and 4, or 4 and 5. You can see it's giving you a little preview of your grid lines. You could number them. I mean, we could spend a long time going through all of the different settings. It's probably best for you just to explore that on your end. Then with the let's see, with the title block itself as distinct from the border, you could use that as a title block only. It gets rid of the border. You can edit the title block layout itself. So here's where you could customize the out-of-the-box title block that Vectorworks ships with. You can import title block graphics. So in this case, I've got that old symbol that I just showed you initially, and I could import that and it would replace the graphics with your old symbol. But then when you get to the actual project data, there's all sorts of fields that you can add from the project data or create your own. Likewise with the sheet data. And then just trying to get, once you've replaced the standard, this is unstyled, so let's go back to the title block settings. There you go. You can see that because my old title block symbol includes a border, it's not quite fitting nicely within all of that. So rather than try to import your symbol into the Vectorworks title block border object itself, what I found is a little bit easier to do is to go ahead and insert a title block and then go to edit style and then go to the title block and edit the title block layout. So this is kind of like a super version of editing a data tag layout or a drawing layout. And so in this case, I just went inside my symbol and grabbed all of this geometry and then just sort of superimposed it with the existing text that came with the standard Vectorworks title block. And then I just sort of moved the Vectorworks text in the place of my old text. So for example, this sheet A1 here, you can see that under the title block data at the bottom of the object info palette, the data type is either not linked, or it could be a drawing stamp. I'll get to the drawing stamp in a minute. So it's linked, and then it's linked to all of these, any number of these parameters that come built into the title block object. So your choices are essentially either use a Vectorworks title block, right out of the box, or edit it, or try to sort of shoehorn your title block into the tool. And I find that editing the Vectorworks title block to conform to your graphic standards is a lot easier and more reliable than just trying to import your title block and inserting it into the Vectorworks title block object, if that makes sense. And then the nice thing about the title block object, unlike sort of the very first version of the title block that I showed you, which was just sort of a homemade record format bearing symbol, you can see right here, this is called out as A1 and it's called out as test sheet. So if I go to my organization dialog box and I go to my sheet layers and I rename A1 as, say, A100, and from test sheet, I call that sample, right? And hit OK. You can see that the object is reading your organization dialog box and is assigning the name of the sheet and the sheet number to the title block automatically. Likewise, if I go to my settings and I go to project data, all of these fields, which again, you can customize them with the manage project data button, all of these fields are going to be consistent for every title block within a single project file. So I'll change modern title block to sample title block, and then that will just change. Yeah, I only have one sheet, but it'll change it everywhere. And then likewise, I have sheet data. And so I can have some additional, like I can pick the date, today's date, or I can click on today's date. I can say who it's drawn by, right? And then it'll give me it's a drawn by. So parts of the title block are variable sheet to sheet. Other parts of the title block are just consistent through the whole project. And then of course, once you've got that set up the way you like it, you can go ahead and save it as a style, and that can go into your template, and you could have certainly different title blocks for different purposes. Another nice thing about this, about the Vectorworks title block object, is that it will conform to your sheet size. So if I go to my dialog box here, and I go to edit that and page setup, and say just make it an arc C. You can see the title block sort of border reshaped itself automatically to that. Now I'm going to need to, scale my title block itself. You can see that by default, that's a scale factor of 1. So let's go ahead and edit that style and make the scale factor, variable. And so I can make that 0.7, whatever that is, 0.75. Or just do the math and figure it out. So, so that's kind of nice. And then if you have it by default set to fit to printable area, in this case it is. Again, this is a styled object, so I can edit the style to make that user changeable, right? So there we go. So if that is fit to printable area, that's it. Or I can make it custom, right? Fit to page, or whatever. But it's sort of locked into your sheet, so don't have to worry about your title block drifting off. So there's numerous settings in the title block object. Rather than try to build one from scratch, I think it's probably the best procedure is to start out with something that's reasonably close in the Vectorworks style libraries, import that, and then start editing that style, change the fonts or eliminate fields that you don't need or add fields that you do. it's a very comprehensive tool, certainly suitable for even large commercial projects that will have listings for consultants and so forth. You can fit all of that in. I'm sure there's a lot of features of it that I'm only touching on, but hopefully that's a good place to start.